I suppose that I should record a meaningless end cap just to wrap this all up. So, just to summarize, I believe Control was intended to be a $40 game. I don't know what it cost at launch exactly. Some of them launch at $60. The claim by Steam or GOG is that the running rate at the time of this recording, which is 6/18/2023, is $40. At the exact moment, it's on sale on both platforms for $10. Now, the reason I say supposedly is because oftentimes with products, and you might be very familiar with this if you're, shop on Amazon. Wow, something bad happened to me. Okay. The price sometimes is, there's always a big number crossed out in a little number. So you have a situation where it's always on sale as depicted, but that's really, the price you actually pay is usually what the price always is. They just depict it like that to suggest that you're getting a deal. That being said, what I paid for it back when I paid for it was quite a bit more than $10. It was like $12 or $18 in that range. So, but it definitely wasn't close to 40. It was released, the mainline part, or the original part of the game, the part that's the mainline story, was released in 2019, I believe. And there are two DLCs that were released later. One was called, the first of those was called the Foundation, and the second was called AWE. The Foundation being, well, opening up the area that is the Foundation, and AWE being the investigation sector. Now, why am I like too much gameplay going on here? Never mind. Now, and they don't really sell them individually anymore, as far as I know. Both Steam and GOG, you can only buy the Control as the Ultimate Edition, which is the original game plus the 2 DLCs. So let's kind of park here for a moment. We'll see the shimmering in the paper there. When you go to the store page on either platform, it tries to age restrict you. GOG for 17 plus and Steam for 18 plus. And to me this seems a bit odd because I've played through all of the content in this game and I haven't found anything particular that, if say I had kids, I wouldn't want my kids to see or interact with based on the content. Now, I might not want my kids playing this just because it may not be a very good use of their time. And you know how parents would be like that, right? They always want the best for their kids, which seems to sometimes suggest that they should be always being productive and always doing stuff to give them a quote-unquote better life, whatever that means later. It makes you tend to not want your children to be playing video games, spending the time at it, but there isn't anything in the content of the game I would be afraid of children seeing. So I don't know how it actually gets that rating, why exactly it's an M game, but that's how it is. So if you're kind of like one of those people where if a movie's rated R, you don't know if you can take your kids to it or not, because you don't know if it's like 50 Shades of Grey kind of R or it's King's Speech kind of R. The King's Speech is a movie that's very famously rated R, but it isn't something you wouldn't necessarily this isn't something you would necessarily not take your kids to, or not let your kids go watch. So this is one of those kind of cases where it's rated high, but I don't see why kids couldn't play it. You do get like some profanity here and there, but it isn't laced with it. And it is kind of in a situation where you kind of expect people to use profanity. And there is violence in it, but it's not, for some reason, it doesn't seem worse than a Bionicle game for me. I guess I'm not very sensitive to the specificity of it being humans being blasted and having dead bodies with blood coming out of them or whatever. That doesn't bother me for some reason. Especially because when you shoot the enemies and they die, they just kind of dissipate. They don't like have blood splattering and gut splattering. There isn't really a whole lot of that. It's not like Call of Duty where the bullet goes in, you see blood spurting out. Now, as far as where you'd actually buy it from, I actually didn't. I bought mine off of Steam, as I said in the original episode, and that was before I kind of realized the crisis of game preservation. You see, Steam games, most of them, there are a few that this is not the case, they tend to require the Steam client or the Steam launcher to launch and run, which is all well and good unless, say, Valve Corporation goes out of business. I'm not exactly sure the logistics of how all of the games you bought with your money you would still be able to play. Maybe the community would come up with some sort of permanent Steam client substitute that you could use to launch the Steam games, or there'll be a mass community panic on the games that have a popular enough following to figure out a way to patch them so they don't require the Steam launcher to run. And there's some that are already like that, by the way. So, like, you can Google it, there's a list of games online. I haven't seen Control on this list. But anyway, if you download something off of GOG, which stands for Good Old Games, just GOG.com, you don't have that issue. And so, if something is on GOG, ideally you'd buy it from there instead, as opposed to Steam, especially if it's the same price, which is the case for Control right now. Although I think Steam has sales more often, and so usually Steam is cheaper. Something to keep in mind. With this game, it isn't really that huge a loss because this isn't a game that isn't good enough that I'm really hard over about having to preserve my copy in case Valve goes out of business, but that's something for me to keep in mind for the future. At the time I bought this game, I didn't even know that GOG or GOG existed. I didn't even know about that, so I didn't know about that in PC gaming. In fact, Steam was the only thing I just kind of happened to know about. I almost expected that I should still be able to buy PC games on a disc, right? I'm someone who still mails in my tax returns. I do things old school. It would be nice if I could buy it with a disc. Now, something about Steam is that Steam does have those achievement lists, so it does help you, like, give you some indication as to whether or not you've actually done everything in the game yet. Whereas if you just had the game by itself, it isn't as helpful. But then if you just had the game by itself, you could potentially get spoiled by Steam achievements, because there is a game I've played where the Steam achievements are kind of spoilery, which is problematic. Anyway, now, as far as how good the game is, occasionally it happened, but very rarely would I kind of go through my day looking forward to coming home from work to play more Control. It isn't really that addictive. And I don't necessarily, it's sometimes hard to pin that down why this is, but it did very much get to be somewhat like a chore. But I'm going to actually try to take some guesses. Wow, even at the 11th hour, I'm still finding stuff I haven't found before. Cool. I don't need that, but one more chest to go. But it may have something to do with, we'll go through the various elements. The first one is the main selling point of this game is the visuals. It implemented NVIDIA's DLSS, which is not a visual enhancer, but it's something that gives you the illusion of a higher resolution render than what you're actually rendering at. And ray tracing. And it's like a technical demonstration of ray tracing, which all graphics cards can do. It's just that NVIDIA graphics cards are very outstanding in that regard. And it was actually this at 2019, I think the most powerful consumer grade GPU as far as ray tracing is concerned that was out there was NVIDIA's 2080 Ti, which that would be the amount of the how much graphic load you can put on your processor with this, given the options, is way higher than you could reasonably play this with the 2080 Ti. The 4090, I believe, can get close to 60 FPS with everything maxed on this thing. You probably tip over 60 FPS if you turned off ray traced contact shadows. That didn't come out until 2022, 3 years later, which is not that far off. But there's a bit of a technical demonstration. But what they are rendering here, although very technically impressive, there's a lot of cool elements, like how it comes apart and cracks, and you see those like glints, right? That how the ray traced from that light up above, and it glints off the cracks at the right angles and stuff. Is that this is probably to make it easier to do this. Most of the environment is reinforced concrete. So you're basically walking through like a university office lecture building the whole time. With the same floor all over the place, the same kind of walls, the same kind of stairs, the same like assets repeated, the same tables, the same vending machines all over the place, same desks with the same computers and these thingamajiggies here and these mail tubes, and listing off a lot of stuff. But even though I'm listing off a lot of stuff, there is a sense in which every room's kind of the same, and the whole environment is kind of the same thematically, just kind of mixed up and varied a little bit here, a little bit there. There are a couple extra types of environments you can be in. One is the Black Rock Quarry type, which shows up only in the Black Rock Quarry primarily, and the Foundation, which is in a DLC, the red sand, more earthen-like cave wall situation, which is a nice change-up from the typical office building setting. I'm used to, things like Bionicle games where you have various different biomes or environments that you can walk through, like snowy mountains and forests and, caves and lava and deserts and stuff. So you get different, kinds of environments that they made models for and that they're rendering. This is just this gray, kind of blurrily rendered office building that just reminds you of like a workplace environment that really brings you down the entire time you're going through it. And that really makes this thing kind of lose its visual interest. And you're all cooped up and stuff. Now, I will make a concession that the game is supposed to be spooky, right? And environments like this tend to make things spooky. A good analogy I can make is the first Danganronpa, right? Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. You're trapped in this gray concrete building the whole time, and the environment you're trapped in assists in the psychological horror. This is a big aspect of that game, and that game would probably be worse off if they allowed for more broad environments, which in the sequels they do, and you kind of lose that spooky feeling a little bit in the sequels to that game. So it is kind of contributes to the spookiness. That being said, unlike Danganronpa, I didn't really feel the spookiness when I was playing this. This game didn't really spook me that much. It wasn't really that scary. It didn't really have an effect. So basically, I ended up having this environment that was designed to contribute to the spookiness without actually getting the spookiness, and it just made it boring visually. So it is very technically, don't get me wrong, it's very technically impressive. The ray tracing graphics are very technically impressive. How the environment gets destroyed, the chairs get thrown around, and the walls get chipped, and all those little details in the assets to allow different kinds of chipping and throwing and stuff is really cool and impressive. But it's still but the office building gray interior everywhere, the muted gray colors everywhere, will bore you and wear you down and weary you after a while anyway, despite how impressively the building and realistically the building gets destroyed as you go through combat. It's a little good and a little bad there. Next is the story. This game isn't really focused on the story in its development. There really isn't a big plot twist, and if for some reason it really got me invested in the story. The story is Jessie came here looking for Dylan, and then she just basically finds Dylan, except Dylan, and saves Dylan, I suppose. But then Dylan just ends up in a coma, and we don't know what's going to happen to him, and that's how it ends. She saves Dylan from getting dissipated, like if you were to shoot anybody else with a service weapon. For some reason, Dylan gets special treatment, though, by the plot. When everybody else gets possessed by the hiss, they have to be destroyed. He, for some reason, doesn't. And there are some goofy, funny stuff like Dr. Darling, but for some reason I just wasn't invested in it, and it didn't really seem like the writers were really putting a lot of emphasis on it in the development. They weren't really trying to write a very intricate, complex story that invokes emotions. They were just trying to have something that they could wrap this environment and these technically impressive stuff and gameplay mechanics around. It's very just kind of sweep it under the rug-ish in nature. It's like, these guys get possessed by the hiss. Let's see if we can try to to push the hiss out of them. No, we can't. Okay, the only thing we can do is destroy them. So that gives me, in the story context, free reign to kill people ad nauseum and just wipe humanoid figures out and blow them up and throw things at them and whatever now. We've made our excuse to make our gameplay mechanics work. And then even though there's supposed to be a finite number of employees in the National Bureau of Control, these enemies spawn indefinitely. So they couldn't explain that with the story, could they? It doesn't put a lot of effort in. It just seems like something that was meant to act as a wrapper around the mechanics, basically. And that's where, and those two things, like the drabness of your environment and the lack of a story, is what made the game made me not really that invested in the game. Those are kind of like the negatives. Now, on more of the positive note, another technically impressive thing with this, besides the rendering and the graphics, is the gameplay mechanics and the whole launch mechanic. That is cool. In fact, all of the mechanics are pretty cool. Levitate was even cool. I know it's been done over and over again in a lot of video games, but still cool. The shield was cool, even though by my playing style I didn't really use it that often. But it was cool. The launch was really cool. The service weapon modes is something that's kind of been done a lot, but it still was done well. They didn't mess that up, even though that's a very common video game thing to do. So the fight mechanics, how you have multiple different ways you can do damage, the way the controls are laid on the keyboard is pretty good. You can change it, it's customizable, but the default inputs are pretty well done. How the fighting works is pretty well done. The difficulty is pretty good. It may not necessarily appeal to the reason why people want to escape into video games that well, in the sense that people can sneak up behind you a lot in the mechanics, which is really frustrating, especially the enemies that teleport in the Foundation. Sometimes video games, although unrealistic, try to relieve that by putting a scope on your screen that shows you where your enemies are. Bionicle Heroes style. Control doesn't do that, which makes it more frustrating, makes it more like the real world, which may not be why you want to play it in a video game. However, again, part of this is supposed to have kind of the spooky tone. It's supposed to be kind of a horror game. So the whole look out behind you thing does contribute somewhat to the tone they were going for. And they might mess up that a little bit if they put in a scope that told you that there were enemies behind you. But yeah, the gameplay mechanics are really good. Of course, they always reminded me of the whole Bionicle games thing in Bionicle Mass, right? You have the telekinesis and the shielding and the levitation, right? And the speed. But that's not like this stole from Bionicle. It's like more like Bionicle stole from everything else. Those are just common tropes already. And it's a third-person shooter, too. It's very Bionicle game-like. So the combat mechanics were cool. It's just that they didn't really do much beyond the combat mechanics, right? They didn't put a good story in there. They just put just enough story to kind of wrap the combat mechanics up in a package with a story that goes with it. So, if you get it on sale for $10, is it kind of worth $10? Well, it depends on if you think video games are worth anything or not, but it's not a bad game. It's just that it's not like amazing. Like, I'm not gonna, sing praises about how much fun I had. It's okay. Sometimes I feel bad about saying things like that, because imagine the effort it took to develop this. I know there's a lot of copy and pasting of assets, but it takes a while to do these copying and pasting. So you get to copy and paste all these individual plants, and do all these individual walls and all these individual chairs and all these individual textures, and you have to redo all this stuff all over again for every room and drag things around, and it's kind of a pain in the butt, right? So a lot of long hours and ecclesiastical thinking and getting yelled at by your boss went into this. A lot of the analogies to blood, sweat, and tears for video game development. So you guys who developed this, I appreciate what you do. Your job is not easy and kind of boring, right? It's not as if you like playing video games, it doesn't necessarily mean you like making them. And I guess I'll sign off. You might be wondering, well, these renderable video games, right? These high graphics intensive ones. What do you plan on doing next with this? And I would say, well, the first one I played didn't really give me that much of a good impression, right? I will play Stray just because I have it in my library. And maybe in the far future I'll try to pick up Dark Souls. But I won't play very much more of this. The only things really on the table that I would like to try out just because of their reputation are Dark Souls and Crysis. Yeah. Those two franchises. Not really anything else. And it's not like they're really high on my priority list. It's not like I'm immediately going to jump out and buy them and play them. I'm going to take a couple of years off from this, honestly. So, and may not ever. This isn't really my thing. But I'm glad I tried it, so I don't have to constantly wonder from here on out, right? I gave this kind of thing a shot, and now I kind of understand what a GPU is for and what it looks like when it really has to work. So, and then I can go back to my day job and use them for stuff that's secondary to their primary purpose. If you watched any of my gameplay footage of Control, which not very many people did, most of those videos have 0 views, and if you were to go to my videos tab on my YouTube page and sort by most popular, you'll find the Control videos is the sediment falling down to the bottom of the page. This is the sledge, right, at the bottom in the wastewater treatment plant. But if you are the very, very few people that watch some of this footage, thank you for watching it, thank you for clicking on it, thank you for watching it. So I don't have to talk into the air, talk to hear my head rattle. And yeah, I really appreciate that. Not like I made something that's really good to watch. Just like it's kind of nice when like people acknowledge your existence. I got your attention. I got a piece of you. And I'll sign out. This should be the last thing I do on this. Got Alt Tab and hit stop recording.